You're listening to the Fertility Docs Uncensored podcast, featuring insight on all things fertility from some of the top-rated doctors around America. Whether you're struggling to conceive or just planning for your future family, we're here to guide you every step of the way.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Susan Hudson from Texas Fertility Center with another episode of Fertility Docs Uncensored. I am joined with my lovely and talented co-host, Dr. Eblen from Nashville Fertility Center.
Hey, everybody.
And Dr. Carrie Bedient from Fertility Center of Las Vegas.
Hey, y'all. It cracks me up every single time. All three of us have to stop whenever we're introducing each other, stop and think, okay, what is the right arrangement of city and fertility center, and which is the correct one that matches the name that I'm saying? Like, you can see it in our faces every single time.
It's the hardest part of the entire podcast.
Because everything else we can just say and we don't have to be so precise about it. But, that stuff we have to be more precise about.
Yes. So, Abby, you got dessert last night. You were mentioning that you had the most interesting dessert you've had.
Yeah, I'm coming upon a birthday. So my husband and I went out and maskless, I might say, and the mask ordinance has been lifted in Nashville. So it felt a little weird. But I had this really cool dessert. It was whiskey ice cream, which sounds gross, but it actually, all the flavors married well together. Whiskey ice cream, chocolate bacon cake, and then this toffee crunch underneath it. And it just all worked really well together. It was just like you get a little scoop of the ice cream and then the cake and then the toffee. And it was great.
You
it was
the
awesome.
Sweet and the salty.
And the crunchy and the soft. And it was really good.
So how did you decide? Because most people, if you look on a menu and you see chocolate, bacon, whiskey, ice cream, and toffee in the same description, kind of like, I don't know about this. So how did you decide to take the plunge? Because for me, when I order dessert out, it's a calculation of, am I going to like this? Is this going to be worth the calories?
The calories, yeah, I agree.
I don't try and eat dessert any more than I have to, which is kind of a problem.
I wasn't going to eat it, but then they said that it was free. So my husband was like, free? And so he goes, I'll share it with you. So that was the magic word right there that was the tipping point. But I look for the word chocolate. When there's different options on the menu, if it's got the word chocolate in it, then that's my choice.
So I have a question. Are you a chocolate without nuts type person or a chocolate with nuts type person? Because I can tell you, to me, chocolate with nuts is the perfect marriage. It's kind of like the Coca-Cola formula. Nothing is better.
If it's gooey chocolate, I'll take it any way I can get it. So I don't really care. In cakes, I'm not so big on nuts in the cake because I just feel like it adds calories. But if it's gooey chocolatey, like Mississippi mud with cake with, nuts in it, it's really good.
What about you, Carrie? Chocolate with or without nuts? Or any way you can get it?
It entirely depends on the circumstances. For example, if you give me a handful of nuts versus a handful of nuts covered in chocolate, that is an easy answer. If you offer me brownies, in general, I'm going to want to be nutless. Unless it's a pecan turtle type brownie.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
In general, I will default to pecans, cashews, the occasional peanuts, those type of things. It is very situation dependent. If you give me ice cream and you put nuts in it, I'm going to be annoyed.
Yeah, you can't really taste the nuts in ice cream. Ice cream kind of freezes the nuts and freezes your taste buds. And I just don't taste them in ice cream. But I do like nuts, though. I snack on nuts all the time.
I just think chocolate and nuts together is
it's
amazing.
That's a pretty good, yeah.
With all the discussion of nuts, we really should have chosen a male fertility topic for today. That seems like it would have segued better.
Yeah, it does sort of seem that way.
We had, for a gift from my husband, he arranged for someone to come over to our house and cook dinner for our little family. And so that happened last night. And for dessert, it was a little selection of petit fours. And so it was a white chocolate and cinnamon covered strawberry, a dark chocolate covered strawberry, a little chocolate cake, and a little banana cake. And I'm normally the chocolate default. So you tell me there's 3 chocolate things. I mean, 2.5, because white chocolate only kind of counts.
Yeah, I agree.
But actually, the best thing on the plate was the banana cake.
Really?
Yeah, which surprises me because normally, I mean, you put chocolate next to banana and banana bread's good, but come on.
Yeah.
So
I guess if it has a lot of sugar in it, that makes it taste better though, right?
it's true. You put enough sugar in anything and I'm down.
So on that note, we are actually sort of talking about male fertility issues a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
But we got a question first.
okay. Gonal, Follistim, Reunite, EMD Serono, and on and on and on. It's all enough to drive a girl crazy. Who knew that fertility pharmacies were a thing? Who knew that the same drug can have different prices at different pharmacies? Any advice on best practices when looking for fertility medications? This is an excellent question because this is something that our patients encounter on a regular basis and is something where there's two approaches to it, I find, but I would be interested to hear what you girls think and what do you tell your patients when they realize, like when they're starting to realize, hey, these medications are not your $10 Advil prescription or a $15 copay or even a $50 copay most of the time? What do you tell your peeps?
First of all, you have to divide it up between people who have insurance coverage for fertility care and or medications and people who do not. So important things to know that if you have insurance that covers your fertility medicines, if it goes towards your fertility kind of benefit, be warned.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though you may be able to get them from the pharmacy and it may go towards your kind of fertility benefit, if you're going through that particular pharmacy, the medicines may actually be dollar for dollar more expensive than if you went through another fertility pharmacy and maybe eating away at your benefit that you could be using for egg retrieval or embryo transfer or something like that.
So what you're saying is look for the best price, whether you have coverage or not.
Well, look for the best price. If you can afford to pay, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, if you pay for your medicines out of pocket, the true dollar amount will oftentimes be less expensive. But some people have, unlimited benefits and stuff like that. So then it really doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to be wise. Just because you have insurance, don't assume that dollar for dollar that your best option is your insurance. There's also to know that generally when it comes to fertility pharmacies, there's fertility pharmacies that have contracts with Gonal F, and there's fertility pharmacies that have contracts for Follistim. And however they're contracted is going to give you the best price. So if you happen to be needing one or the other, I personally don't really consider there being a big difference between Gonal F and Follistim. Not everybody feels the same way. That's kind of my opinion. And so I say go for a pharmacy that has the contract that's going to get you your best price. And then it also leads into the discussion of purchasing your meds domestically versus internationally, realizing that international meds are not necessarily regulated by the same guidelines that we have. And so there is a potential that you could be compromising quality.
And they can be confiscated at the border, which has happened with my patients. Not recently, but has happened over the years that sometimes if the government realizes you're getting medicines internationally, they may confiscate them.
The other thing to consider when you're price shopping for medications is that it's going to be different from pharmacy to pharmacy. Like Susan said, some are contracted with Gonal and Follistim. There's also some generic options out there that are compounding pharmacies, things like that. When you are looking for prices, sometimes the prices are bundled for patients if they get all of their medications. So you may see, Cetrotide is really cheap at this pharmacy, Follistim is really cheap at this pharmacy, and Menopur is really cheap at this other pharmacy. But if you break up your order to try and go with the cheapest pharmacy, you may lose that cheaper price because their deal is you get all the stuff from us and we will give you a better price. If you do piece by piece, you're going to get less. The other thing to consider is that we're ordering a fair amount of medication here. And so when you're ordering from different pharmacies and when you're asking your coordinators to say, hey, can you send the prescription to pharmacy A, B, and C? And then you choose, okay, I'm going to get med X from pharmacy A, med Y from pharmacy B, med Z from pharmacy C. our coordinators have sent out prescriptions to all these places. The pharmacies don't come back to us and say, Ms. Smith got this from us and this from them and this from this other place. So we have no idea what you have and have not gotten. So when those orders get broken up, it is far more likely that something is going to get missed when you do that, because our coordinators are really good about going through and saying, okay, order all the things for a cycle, and then that script to everybody. But when you start to take charge of, well, I'm going to go price shopping, you really have to be careful that you get everything you need, because you can't just walk into any old Walgreens when you realize at the last minute you forgot something. In most big places, there's a specialty pharmacy in town that you can go get meds, but you can almost guarantee that's going to be the priciest option you have. So that is really a good thing when you get to the end of the cycle and you realize, well, crap, I really need to go 2 more days to get the best results. That is not a good thing when you realize, well, crap, I'm going to need 8 days worth of meds because I just, I didn't order enough because I was piecemealing from the pharmacies. So you kind of got to be careful about that, because cheaper is not always better when you look at the overall success of the cycle.
Well, and one other note on that too, Carrie, is, I think some patients do want to order small amounts at a time. And the other tricky part about that is the worst phone call for me to get on a Saturday night, or one of the worst phone calls from a medicine standpoint, I've run out of I'm supposed to take a trigger shot tonight, and I look through my medicines and I don't have the trigger shot, or I'm supposed to get X dose tonight, it's 10 o'clock and they don't have their medicine, So I think our nurses are pretty good at checking in with the patients right before the weekend to make sure that they have enough medicine. Mm-hmm. But that's also really important to look at, particularly if you're piecemealing your medicines from different pharmacies.
And always watch out for holidays and incoming natural disasters.
Amen.
For us in Nashville, storms up east are always a problem in the summertime, almost always. Or occasionally too, if you're ordering medicines at the last minute, it'll get dropped off on the doorstep of your neighbor 3 doors down who's gone for the weekend, and they don't realize it's your medicine and you don't realize it. So things can definitely happen. So it's always good to have enough medicines to get through the weekend for sure, and even a little extra.
So Susan, some of a lot of the pharmacies we use are in Texas, and oh my goodness, the hurricanes that y'all have and the crappy storms, they screw with our patients' medication supply line more than anything else. So we're like, okay, what's the weather in Texas now that it's hurricane season? Or what's the weather in Texas apparently now that it's snow season? And so we got to keep a sharp eye out for that, because otherwise it's really, really kind of nasty.
Yeah, we're just so big, everything flows through us, especially going out west.
It's true. It's totally true.
So I think that's a lot of great advice having to do with, medications. It's a complicated issue, and we definitely get it. And that's one reason that we're always make sure you have your medicines, because there are limited things that we can do at 10 o'clock at night. So we like to avoid those emergencies if at all possible. So kind of turning to our main topic today. Today, we're going to talk about the big D, disclosure or non-disclosure, depending on what you decide.
Relating to
use of some sort of third-party reproduction, whether it's donor eggs, donor sperm, donor embryos. And Carrie is just about to bust a gut here.
You got to remember, I live in Las Vegas. The stuff that I hear on a regular basis, I did not expect to hear about the big D from my sweet Texas colleague here.
See, I was so naive. That went right over the top of my head, the big D. I didn't get that.
My brain did not go where yours went, Carrie.
Mine didn't either.
You were just so confident and so sweet in saying it. And I'm like, oh, we totally live in different cities. But yes, disclosure in donation.
Big double D's.
So, all right.
Okay,
so
back to the topic.
What is disclosure? What does that mean?
That means if you use donor eggs, donor sperm, or donor embryos, before that event ever takes place, you sort of need to think about, with your partner, or if you're a single woman, think about, what are you going to tell the child down the road? I think it's a hard decision to decide that you want to conceive with donor gametes, and I think that's one of the hardest decisions, but I think the second hardest decision is to decide how and when you're going to tell the child.
So Abby, in your experience, has the concept of disclosure changed in your career?
It has, because I've been around for about 20 years now. And, it's really interesting when I think back to when I started out, it was really something that, was really kind of almost taboo in a way. And particularly couples that were married and maybe the partner had a vasectomy. A lot of times they would say, we don't want to tell the child. We're just going to keep it among ourselves. And, we would always advise at that point that, family secrets are not good, and even back then we would say, really, it's probably best, particularly if you tell one other person other than your spouse, it's probably a good idea, to tell your child. And you can frame it in a way where, we really wanted you and this is the only way we could have you. And, kind of like with adoption. And so, but I do know probably if I had to guess early on, I would say at least half the couples, if not more, chose not to tell their child. And of course, no one could have ever foreseen the development of Ancestry.com or 23andMe, even, 5 or 6 years ago or 8 years ago, much less 20 years ago, that there would be a day that would come where you could send your DNA in and you could see who you matched with. And so I think that's really kind of rocked the world of a lot of people who donated sperm, donated eggs, and donated embryos.
So, Carrie, when somebody comes to you and they're thinking about what we traditionally refer to as anonymous donation, what do you tell people about that, whether they're wanting to be donors or they're wanting to be recipients?
So I tell pretty much everybody nowadays that description of being an anonymous donor, because there's a couple of options. You can be an anonymous donor, and that means that your information as the donor is not disclosed to the recipient, and that the recipient's information is not disclosed to you. So the clinic doesn't convey any of that information in either direction. You can have an open donation where there's the option, usually when the child becomes of age, to get that information, or some previously agreed on arrangement. Or you can have a known donation where it's just upfront from the beginning. Everybody has everybody else's names and contact information. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're hanging out on a Friday night, but it means that you have the ability to get in touch with each other. So I pretty much tell everybody that refers to what the clinic is going to do. Like, we are not going to facilitate the exchange of information in an anonymous donation because both parties have requested that not happen. However, I do tell everyone with facial recognition software, with 23andMe, and with whatever other advances come down the line, that at this point, no donation is really truly anonymous, because if you look, there's a decent chance that you can find what you're looking for, or at least get close enough. And so I tell all of my egg donors, sperm donors, when they come through, usually when sperm donors come through our office, they're not anonymous, they're known, because otherwise they're going through a sperm bank. And anyone who's donating embryos, that, we're not going to facilitate anything, but this could potentially happen. And that communication could be there, because it just takes the child born from a donation and someone in the donor's family to do 23andMe, and you can figure out a connection. And so that's kind of what I tell all my donors of, make sure that you tell the relevant family members. So for someone who's donating, they tell their own children, so that their own children don't do 23andMe one day and go back and say, WTF, what was mom doing? Or what was dad doing? And so that is just there from an appropriate age. And also the recipient couple of, this is, if this child grows up with this being part and parcel of their life and their identity, they're not going to think anything of it. If they find out in a big bombshell when they're, 18, 25, 32, whatever, that's going to have more of a reaction. And there's going to be a lot more trust issues going on there because, well, you lied to me about this. What else did you lie about?
Well, and to that end too, I think if you, like you said, if you find out as an adult, it's a big deal. And I was actually sitting in probably a couple of years ago with Michelle Martins, who's been a guest on our show before. She does our implications counseling, and just listening to kind of what she brought up, it kind of hit some points that I'd never thought about. And she made a comment to the couple that she was speaking with that, chances are if you use donor sperm or donor embryos or donor eggs chances are you're going to save one piece of paper. Even if you want to do it anonymously, you're going to save one piece of paper that says something about that. And so even if your child doesn't do those things or doesn't find out in that way, what happens when you die? And like Carrie said, your child's going to be thinking, was mom cheating on dad, or, what was going on? And like, again, if she lied to me about this, can I trust anything else she told me? And, even though you as a parent did it in a very loving way because you wanted to have a child, you wanted to bring a child into the world, they may not see that way after you pass away. And I was telling you guys last week, I think, that I read a book called Inheritance by Dani Shapiro. And she, as a 51-year-old woman, found out that the father that she thought was her father her entire life was not her father. And she found it out after both her parents had died. So the book sort of traced her steps as she tried to piece everything back together. And, ultimately, I think it had a relatively happy ending. She met up with her donor and they connected. But, there's still for her a lot of unanswered questions because she wasn't able to talk to her parents about it. And so I think it would have been probably better for her if her father or mother had been alive and she could have really kind of discussed it with them and understood better why they did what they did.
Yeah, I think that, I imagine most of the research is done in children who have been adopted, just because this has been going on for, centuries, literally. But I think that there's pretty good data to say that the children who have been adopted have much better kind of sense of self and peace with the fact that they have been adopted when it's just always, it's a part of their being. Mm-hmm. And it's not a big, oh my goodness, thing that happens at some, random age due to whatever event it is. And I know there are some books and videos and things that have really started coming out in the last few years to help parents make that, this is part of our story and make it a beautiful part of the story. And that how much of a gift that this opportunity was for us to be able to have this child through whichever means we needed to go through.
I kind of appreciate as someone who gives, sex ed lectures to one of the schools in the area and really to all the kids in the neighborhood whose parents ask, I appreciate the opportunity that this has of a couple who use donor gametes. It means that in order to introduce this to their child, because sex ed gets such a big, kind of scary rap because of all the social implications of it. When you look at it with respect to the fact that, this is really just teaching anatomy in a lot of respects and physiology and what happens and how pregnancy actually happens and what happens with periods and ejaculation and like all of those types of things that you just kind of got to tell someone at some point because you're either going to tell them or they're just going to experience it. And it's kind of nice to have the advanced knowledge. But I appreciate it from that aspect because it really encourages okay, this is how babies are made. And you don't have to put any of the social implications of you should never have sex, you should only have sex at this age, you should, whatever the social mandates are. Like this isn't about that at all. This is how your body works. This is how your body is made. This is how babies are made. This is how this one cell comes in contact with this other cell. And then this is how mommy and daddy did it because our cells were not behaving. And it takes a lot of the social stuff out of it that makes sex ed so scary. It helps the kid to know just from the very beginning, oh yeah, mommy and daddy had to borrow a cell from somebody.
That's a good way to put it.
And that's because that's truly all that it is. And people get really bent out of shape about this because they feel like it says something about their worth as a human being and about how much they do or do not love their child and all of those types of things. And no, it's that someone borrowed a cell. And it's only one cell too.
You bring up a good point. I think a lot of our patients that are listening, you do feel like it's part of your self-worth. And if you can't make eggs or if your partner can't make sperm or you don't have access to sperm, for some people, they really internalize that and feel like that's part of their self-worth. And I think that's a great point, Carrie, that it's just, my body's not behaving. And so, if my hair's gray, I can put color on it and change it. If my egg is not working, then I can take another egg and it doesn't mean anything about me as a person either way,
Yeah. It's how we get to our desired result, if that's the right direction for us to go, and making sure that, in this day and age, it relatively is probably almost impossible to keep this. I can say in my career, I've only had one couple that I remember that were stone cold against any level of disclosure, so much so that they wouldn't even let us transfer any records to their OB.
I've actually had a few people like that don't want to disclose to their OB that it was a donor egg.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I've had some people who have not gone back to their same OBs because they've been scared about their judgment of them.
Yeah.
And that makes me sad. It breaks my heart when that happens.
Particularly too in small towns. I've had a few patients who are from small towns, and, being raised in a small town, I get it. Everybody does know everybody. And the person who's the receptionist at the doctor's office, you may see in church on Sunday, so I think it's a little more difficult in smaller towns to kind of let those things, kind of be out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. But also realize you have a network of people behind you that can help you kind of guide through the system. Your reproductive endocrinologist can help you. If you're going through any type of third-party reproduction, you're probably under most circumstances going to visit with a counselor, because that is something that's recommended very, very, very strongly by our national society. And there are other resources out there available to help you kind of manage these waters.
Well, and I would say too, in fact, I saw a patient this week who was really grappling with, did she want to conceive with donor gametes? And, she was asking me lots of different questions. And I said, a good place to start would be with the psychologist, because, she can help you identify kind of what you're worried about, or, what's kind of keeping you from moving forward. And maybe that's not the right direction for you. So maybe she can help you decide one way or another which direction you want to go. And I always tell patients, I think we all three have the privilege of being able to talk to our patients after they have their children. And that's one of the funnest phone calls you can make, is to call somebody and go, so what do they look like? Or how are you doing? Or, and they're, a lot of times patients, even though they may be exhausted, they can't wait to talk to you and tell you about how thrilled they are about their child, or how tired they are. But, when I've called those patients many times, even without even asking, they'll say, Dr. Eblen, if I could tell my younger self 2 years ago what I'm experiencing now, I wouldn't have hesitated to do this. This is a wonderful thing. And, I don't look at my child and go, gosh, she wasn't conceived from my egg or from my husband's sperm or something like that. You just look at your child and think what a precious baby she is and how wonderful it is. And so I think a lot of patients have that experience once they go through it, but it's a hard decision on the front end to make that final decision that you want to use some sort of donor gamete.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Carrie, any last advice from you?
No, I think the one thing that I have been kind of thinking about throughout this episode is, what is a good age to tell your kid? And I don't know that I have a great answer for that. I would say certainly when I teach sex ed to kids, it's about age 11. They know more and more every year that I go. So the discussion gets more in depth every year that I go, because they're coming in with more knowledge. And so, I would kind of say somewhere in the area of like 7 or 8, is what I've heard some of the counselors recommend. But one thing that really kind of has occurred to me is that when you tell a kid when they're in that young age bracket, it means that they're still going to you as the family for their primary support for everything. By the time you tell a kid when they're a teenager, they're going to their friends, because that's right. The appropriate development of independence. Like that is the normal pathway. That's what people do as they're growing up, because they're starting to separate from their parents. And so when you do tell at those early ages, it means that they go back to you as the parent to get support and to get meaning and understanding. And that means that you have a little bit more control of the narrative than when they go to their 13-year-old friend who really doesn't know really about Scott. And so that's one thing that when you think about the actual functional, well, crap, what age do I tell my kid? That's probably when, it starts to make sense in some of the biology of like, yeah, you have one cell and you have another cell, and you've probably seen pictures of this in science class, and this is how it works. And yeah, we borrowed a cell.
Or, I like your idea. Yeah. Start that at an early age when they're little, just say, you're my baby, but I had to borrow a cell to make you. And, as they get older, you can kind of extrapolate more on that.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Very awesome. Good conversation. Good conversation. Well, to our audience, thank you so much for listening, and be sure to tune in next week for more. Also, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you.
You can also visit us on fertilitydocsuncensored.com to schedule an appointment with any of us or submit any specific questions you have about infertility or podcast ideas. We love getting ideas from our patients and our listeners. All questions will be answered anonymously on our Ask the Doc segment, so don't hold back. The more in-depth, embarrassing, involved, and entertaining, the better.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.